You're listening to The Back 40, the podcast for Ontario farmers, covering topics and issues that matter most to Ontario agriculture. Brought to you by Trillium Mutual Insurance, bringing the ag community together one podcast at a time. I'm the host of The Back 40, Mike Brine, agribusiness specialist at Trillium Mutual Insurance. For as long as I can remember, farm accidents have been happening on farm, and we hear about them, we read about them. In many cases, we've seen our neighbors that have been involved in them. And it's not something that's new. This has been going on for a very long time, for 100 years, ever since we've had farm machinery, mechanized farm machinery, and before that, livestock. There have been farm accidents where people have gotten hurt and killed, and life-altering incidents there. Almost as long as we've been seeing those, we've been trying to find a way to make sure there are fewer of them on farm. Today, we're going to be talking to Robin Anderson from the Canadian Agricultural Safety Association. Robin, welcome to the Back 40.
Hi.
So what is the Canadian Agricultural Safety Association?
So CASA, the Canadian Agricultural Safety Association, has been around for about 25 years. It started out back in the 90s. Folks came together, were really concerned about farm safety at that point, and decided that they needed a national organization to really address the lives lost and the folks injured on farms. So it really started out of Saskatchewan with Dr. Jim Dosman, who we consider the grandfather of farm safety. And it started out there. CASA has evolved. It originally was a funding organization. And what would happen is folks from across the country would put together proposals about farm safety programs, events, that sort of thing that they'd like to see in their communities. And CASA helped distribute funds to make those happen. In the last 10 years, CASA has evolved, and now we are more of a program delivery model / a hub that we work with other organizations and other partners to work on farm safety, bringing farm safety and health to the forefront. Our vision is for safe and sustainable agriculture where healthy farm communities thrive. So that's what we're all about, and that's what we're striving to do.
So a lot of what you're doing is education of the farm community about the issues around farm safety.
Yes, somewhat. Yeah. Awareness, building each other up, amplifying messages with partners. Being a hub, that's really important to us, is trying not to duplicate programs across the country. Because, for example, Farm Safety Nova Scotia, awesome organization out of Nova Scotia, has been doing some really great things. And if we're able to be that hub to link perhaps another jurisdiction to what Nova Scotia is doing, that's where we come into play. So we act as that hub. We have that linkage between all the farm safety organizations in the country. And then, of course, we also deliver programs that are CASA specific as well.
So when you're delivering the CASA programs, how do you manage that?
Yeah, so we're based out of Winnipeg. We're a small organization. There's only 5 employees at CASA, and we're board driven. Our members drive the mandate of the organization. And so we really work on some flagship programs. So, for example, our Be Grain Safe program, which is a grain safety awareness and training program, which addresses the issues of grain entrapment and engulfment. That's one of our flagship programs. We train firefighters, we bring awareness, we raise awareness. And then this year, we're actually launching Be Grain Safe Week in August, which is just an awareness event to really talk about the dangers around grain, because we have seen an increase in deaths due to asphyxiation in grain. So that's one of our flagship programs. We also do things like we lead the Canadian Agricultural Safety Week, and that happens every March. And that is another flagship awareness event where we bring that conversation once again to what's happening, how we can impact for the positive, that whole concept of changing the culture around safety. And, something that, we've always said is that we're in the business of culture change. We know that this isn't something that's going to happen overnight, where farm injuries and incidents and deaths are just going to stop. We have to continually work on that. And that's CASA's job, is to continually work on lifting up farm safety and lifting up farm health and wellness.
Now, I mentioned that we've seen this for many years. I mean, I can remember growing up, neighbors that have had fatal and life-altering accidents on the farm there. Are we seeing a change in attitudes on the farm? Is it a slow change or an improvement, or do we still have a lot of the same problems that we had 50 years ago?
Well, that's interesting conversation. And something that we've done in the past, we do regularly, we work with Farm Credit Canada, FCC, is to do an attitudinal survey of producers just to understand whatever we do, we want to make sure it's based in reality, truth, and science. So, we ask producers right on the ground what they think, what they know, all of those things. And honestly, most producers feel that work is done safely on their operation. They identified their common health and safety risks, but most producers do feel that work on their operation is done safely most of the time. And that's probably fairly true. But that being said, we are still seeing deaths and injuries on the farm. Averages are about around 100 deaths due to agriculture-related incidents a year, according to the Canadian Agriculture Injury Reporting data. So we still know people are dying on the farm. And for every death, there are numerous serious injuries where people are losing limbs or are paralyzed or serious traumatic brain injury. And then from all of those incidents, there's numerous more incidents where someone isn't as significantly hurt, but it's a time loss injury, right? So a broken arm, lost a finger, those sorts of things. And then, of course, the hundreds of thousands of close calls. There is those concepts of understanding that there's a bit of a cognitive dissonance, right? And we all are really guilty of it. I'm incredibly guilty of it, right? We think and know one way, but we behave and do things in another way. On that attitudinal survey, producers say they're motivated to improve safety on their operation, but it's not always reflected in the behaviors. So they might be like, yes, we're continually motivated to improve safety on the farm, but they might not go get more training or train their employees, or maybe they don't put in a safety plan. Like they don't do the things that would necessarily impact and make improvements of safety.
There's that disconnect. I think that some of the problem here is what I think of as being safe on a farm is not necessarily what my neighbor thinks about being safe on a farm, or the person up the road thinks of that. We all have that different attitude. And for some people, I look at what they do and I think, oh my gosh, like I would never. And they're looking at that and they think they see nothing wrong with that. These attitudes, though, that's something that we really need to change, is get people out of that mindset that, we're going to do it that way because we've always done it that way. And we know that that's okay because nobody's ever gotten hurt. But when something happens to someone in the community, it's like, we've all done something like that. And 99 times out of 100, you get away with it. Where do we go with that? How do we change those attitudes?
So I think a lot of those attitudes are changing, right? And they're changing significantly. And you can definitely see that with people's embracing of change. And you can see that. Like, I don't think that we're stuck. It's just a slow march forward. It's more or less just trying to talk to cradle to grave. In CASA, we do programs for kids. We work with the Progressive Agriculture Foundation in the United States and bring safety days for kids up to Canada. And that's a really great step into the right direction with kids and talking farm safety with kids right at that young age and talking about hazards and things like that. It's also just a part of what exactly are we trying to get out of our operation? We all know that business case for safety. That's important to remember again and again. And then it's also remembering those personal impacts. A loss of a loved one devastates families. You don't get over that. It's, I think, a multifaceted approach. It's meeting people where they're at and not expecting farms and farm families and farmers and farming communities to just change overnight, where everything is just super regulated. We don't want that. What we want is really vibrant, excited farm families that raise kids on the farm so that the next generation can take over, I personally come from a farm family that got their Century Farm Family Award in 2005. And that's incredible to me. That is a real heritage and a legacy, and that I'm really very proud of. But when we have a fatal injury or even a significant injury, those farms don't last. It's one of those things where we just really are working by telling stories, bringing resources, working with partners, and getting communities really to work ground level to make the change that needs to happen. So we don't see 100 deaths on Canadian farms a year.
Yeah, 100 deaths is still way too many. I know that the goal is always to have zero. We joke a little bit about you working yourself out of a job, but the goal to have zero is probably not a reasonable one for us to have. But 100 is still way too many, and especially since many of those are very, very preventable. It's a second of inattention. It's doing something we know isn't right, but it's a shortcut, and we've always been able to do it. What's the most common type of accident that we see on farms, or is there any sort of pattern?
I can tell you what the top mechanisms of fatal injuries are. So, how people die. And it's, of course, machine related. It's runovers, rollovers, pinned and struck. And those are the top three ways folks are killed on the farm. Rollovers, your bucket's too high, you're on a slope, forklifts, ATVs, well, being used for farming activities. Those are all ways folks get killed. The number one way folks get run over is actually a lighted runovers, and that's the operator of the machine running themselves over.
When you start and think about it, I don't know of a farmer out there that isn't aware how you go about starting a tractor by shorting out the starter. And the starter's right in front of the back wheel. It is one of the easiest things to do and one of the things that you should never do.
We had a family friend who it was a lighted run over, and the wheel was stuck and it was just going in a circle. So it was just going to run him over again and again, right? And he managed to crawl out of the way, but it just chills you to the bone to even think about that happening to someone. And then pinned or struck, that's usually between, of course, either, like a front end loader or a building, or sometimes a hydraulic falls, things like that. So they get pinned or struck. And of course, motor vehicle collisions with farm equipment is also part of that. And we see that fairly regularly. There's not a week that goes by that we don't get a media hit about someone being killed in a road related incident with a piece of farm equipment. Those are the big ways. Kids, of course, it's runovers, especially when they're smaller. Also, drowning for children on farms is also a problem. And it's asphyxiation, not only just in water, but also in grain.
It's interesting when you talk about that, but almost every single one of those that you've gone through there are preventable. And in many cases, very, very preventable. I'm thinking back, my dad told a story about when he was working underneath their combine and had a corn head on it and a hydraulic line broke. And he said he had put the block in, but he hadn't taken the pressure off, hadn't lowered it onto the block. So there was maybe a quarter inch of room there for it to come down. And he said it came down so quickly on that, he got a shot of hydraulic fluid across the side of his face. You wouldn't have time to worry about whether or not you were going to get killed. You'd just be gone. And he said, yeah, we never went under a combine unless it had the block in. And you think, man, that's a waste of time. But it can happen, right? Little things like that can happen so quickly. There's no going back after it's happened.
We hear that a lot, like the shortcuts and the fatigue. You've got to think these farmers, they are working day and night to get a crop in, to get a crop off, to get their livestock handled, to milk. They are working constantly. These farmers don't stop. So you've got to think that fatigue plays a huge role. And then, of course, when that happens, you're fatigued, you're not eating well, you get a plug, something breaks, then that's where shortcuts come into play. That's where bad decisions come into play. And then you see injuries.
Yeah, I think that the number one way you can prevent that is good habits. Because when we get fatigued, we do things just automatically. And if you're in the habit of doing things in the proper way, then chances are you'll do them in the proper way. And if you're in the habit of occasionally taking shortcuts, your judgment's impaired. You may take a shortcut you shouldn't take. And a lot of times you'll get away with it. That's why we do it. But every so often you'll get caught. And the results are too terrible for us to get caught on that.
We always talk about planning ahead. Plan farm safety is one of the older CASA messages, and it's still pretty true. Plan your route. Plan for emergencies. Plan how you're doing procedures. Plan a safety program. Those things really can help improve the safety on your farm, and it can improve, how you're going to do your day-to-day activity. I mean, and the other thing is that it makes really good business sense. It makes such good business sense to have a farm safety plan in place because it can save an operation hundreds of thousands of dollars just by having a training program in place or putting in eye wash stations. Those things can really help increase that safety, increase the sustainability of your operation.
And you talked about how farmers are often rushing and they're working long hours and operating heavy machinery. And your answer is going to be, well, I just simply don't have time for that. But think about how much time you save when you have an accident. All of a sudden, everything stops. And if it's a catastrophic accident, it stops for quite a while. You really didn't save too much time by taking that shortcut. It makes a lot of sense to have that. And I'll bet that a lot of farms don't have a safety program per se on farm. They talk about safety and they may do things correctly, but to put actually a plan in place, I don't think that happens very often, does it?
You're right. So part of that FCC survey was the question about, do you have a written safety plan? And 1 in 10 producers do. but we'd love to get that number up. There are some downtimes with farming, right? Like if you're cash cropping, you've got some downtime where you're planning your inputs, you're checking out the markets, you're looking at your next year's equipment. Now's the time to do that kind of thing. Of course, you don't want to be writing a safety plan in the middle of harvest. That's going to be tough, but let's look ahead, right? Take some time, before you get busy to put a plan into place. CASA does have a free template for a farm safety plan. Anybody's welcome to use it. And if they have questions, of course, they could contact us. We can help them with that. And we can direct them to folks within their area where they can get help filling that thing out. There's resources. There's a ton of really, really, really amazing resources out there for producers. It's just a matter of accessing it and making it a priority.
Why do you think it's not a priority? What is it? Because, you talk about time, but as you say, there's downtimes for everybody. We all have time to do things that are important. And people that are not doing safety plan obviously don't see that is important. So what is it that's holding us back? Why don't we see that as being important?
Well, I don't know about you, but I don't like doing my taxes. I work in safety. I get it. It's not wildly exciting. It's not buying a new piece of awesome equipment. It's not deciding what inputs you're going to put in. It's not building a new barn. It's not any of that stuff. It's work. It can be draining and it can be time consuming. I get it. I get why people are like, okay, yeah, I get it. But at the same time, I don't want to do it. And I totally understand that. And it's just all about finding that internal motivation, that time, and really deciding that this is something you really just want to do for your family, your farm, and your community and yourself. It's just really making sure that that is moving yourself forward into that safe space as much as you possibly can, your operation. So I completely understand. I've got 5 nephews and nieces, and they're all under the age of 6, and they all live on 2 different farms. And I'm anti no fun, right? I am anti no fun. It's my name. I'm very proud of it, right? And I get it, right? Like sometimes I'm like, hey guys, I get that it seems really exciting to do X, but it's really unsafe, and this is why. And that's pretty okay with me, to be anti no fun. But I can understand why it is not as interesting or as exciting as doing other things. I get that. I completely understand that. But it's all about finding that motivation and understanding why you make those things a priority.
Do you like what you're hearing from the Back 40? We'd like to hear from you. Send us an email with your comments and thoughts to theback40@trilliummutual.com or follow us on social media @TrilliumMutual. Yeah, and you talked a couple of things that were common for accidents, and one, of course, being drowning, and one other being caught in grain as it's being pulled out of either a wagon or a granary. Kids are drawn to water, and kids are drawn to playing in grain. It's stuff that moves, it's stuff, and it seems very, very innocent, especially in the grain. And yet that's the age you need to be teaching the kids that, you know what, you need to stay away from water. You need to stay out of that wagon when it's being emptied. And preferably you just need to stay out of that wagon. Having said that, from a young age, I was into wagons too, just not when they were being emptied. That was never a place that we were supposed to be until we were older and actually had to help shovel them out.
Of course, we want kids to have an incredible love of farming, right? We absolutely do. I nothing would please me more. And we have a little 5-year-old nephew there. His name's Chase, and that little guy is a farmer at heart. He's my brother's kid, that's for sure. Ever since my brother was a little guy, he was going to be a farmer. And this little guy, he's 5, and he has got that farmer attitude. He wants to work hard, and he wants to do chores. He wants things to grow, and he's going to make it happen. And along with that love of farming and fostering that love of farming is really fostering that culture of safety within him. He's really great, right? He pops in the truck, he crawls in his car seat, and he's like, buckle up. We got to buckle up, right? And, understanding that, and even knowing, Grandma, I want to go see the chickens. Can you come with me? And, understanding that conversation and having a safe play area for them and adequate, competent supervision at all times. He's still just 5. As much as he acts like he's, 35, he's still just 5. So making sure that boundaries, there's conversations, and there's supervision for these guys is really, really important, because I am thrilled and excited that little Chase is going to be farmer Chase, but, just growing that love of farming in a safe way. And, the really good resources that we also have on the website. So the Egg Youth Work Guidelines are really a great resource to help caregivers of children understand if they are ready for certain tasks. So it could be anything from, feeding chickens to facing silage, operating machinery, those sorts of things. There's a ton of these guidelines out there. And what you can do is go through it and see, okay, you know what? My child is 16. He's great size, but you know what? He's just not mentally ready to do this. So we're maybe going to take a step back and do a different task. Or my daughter, she is ready to start harvesting apples, and she fills all the requirements, and it's a really great way to help make decisions about those sorts of things, because there's no one true answer for every kid. Every kid's
Mhm.
different, right? Every youth and child is different. So these youth work guidelines are really a great way to help make those decisions, and maybe think about things that you don't necessarily think of as an adult. I would encourage folks, if they are, wanting to get their kids more involved with tasks on the farm, to check out these guidelines. They're a really great tool, and they're on our website. You can absolutely go on there and check them out, just to give you some peace of mind and some true understanding of, oh, okay, I never thought about, this hazard when it came to this task, but it's a good point. So there are, like I said, really good resources out there for just about anything farm safety related. It's just a matter of accessing them.
Yeah, our biggest challenge with the kids, and your 5-year-old nephew is a really good example, is how do we keep Chase safe? And how do we teach him to be safe so that when he grows up, he can benefit from the idea that he wants to be a farmer and he wants to farm for the rest of his life? And we know that can all change with kids. But how do we keep them safe, teach them to be safe so that they can go on and do this? Because there's far too many cases where kids are not kept safe on the farm, and where they get injured or killed. And that's a huge tragedy on the farm. And you can never go back and undo that. That's something, once it's done, it's done. You can't go back and fix that. So we need to do it right the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we have a For Kids Hub page, and, it talks about, especially small children at that age. It's like safe play areas, constant supervision. Those are really, really important for, very young children, as those things. And been doing farm safety for years. Since I was 16 years old. I was in a program called the Power Pack out of Saskatchewan for the Saskatchewan Safety Council. And I used to go to schools when I was 16 and talk to little kids about farm safety. That was just kind of how I got involved. Being a farm kid myself, I was just really always passionate about kids and farms and safety for some reason. I'm a conscientious teenager, I guess.
So why was Auntie No Fun so focused on farm safety? What is it that drives you? Why are you so passionate about this?
Well, there is just something about farm families, right? And, as growing up on the farm and just, loving growing up on the farm and loving my family so much and never wanting to see them hurt. And, like, we've had some close calls on our farm for sure, right? When I was a kid, I remember walking into the house and there was a laundry basket in the porch, and and my daddy still to this day uses handkerchiefs. He still does. You need a hanky. Jack Anderson has one in his pocket. No problem. I cried because of a boyfriend in the middle of the mall one time, and he pulled out a hanky. So
Yeah.
he still has hankies, and he gives them. Anyone needs a hanky, he has one. And inside of this laundry basket was a handkerchief covered in blood. And I remember that so vividly, even to this day. And it's been years and years and years. And I was talking about that with my parents the other day. And my mom she said she was heavily pregnant. And my youngest sibling is only 6 years younger than I am. So at most, I would have been 6. And seeing this handkerchief full of blood where he had actually scrunched his finger off in the glove, we were talking about it. He said, if I would have had a hammer, he said, but I was way in the back, 40. I didn't want to have to stop and come back to the house and get a hammer. And hydraulic, boom, and he squished off the tip of his finger right into his work glove, right? And it was just the tip of a finger. But, I still remember that to this day. Then growing up, and, there was a kid a few towns over that got kicked and was killed by a horse. There was a trenching incident where a farmer was killed in a trench. He was buried in the dirt. And, it was just a constant barrage of these close calls, major incidents, or even deaths. And as a pretty sensitive kid, it was like, my gosh, right? And these are your people, the people you love. And care about the theory. This is your community. These are the people that you want to see live, thrive, succeed, and do so great. This is, so for me, that's always been the motivation is my people, my family, the people I grew up with, my community. And I really believe that agricultural producers across the country are all part of this big, giant egg family. There's not a farmer that I've met that I haven't really enjoyed the conversation with. I've met Sikh farmers in BC that grow blueberries. I've met orchard operators in New Brunswick, and I've met aquaponics operators from Newfoundland, cash croppers from the prairies, and ranchers from Alberta. And these great, amazing farm operations also passionate about farming and growing food and this life. And for me, I can't ever imagine a place where we don't have family farms and don't have thriving agriculture. And for me, part of that thriving agriculture is being safe, maintaining that well-being of everyone on the farm, be it the primary producer, the secondary producer, farm workers, hired hands, kids, migrant workers. They're all such a vital part of this industry. And, for me, that's really always been the motivator, is always been the people aspect, the human aspect of what farming is.
I look in my community here, and as I've said before, I can name off far too many life-altering and life-taking incidents that have taken place. My neighbor was killed in a farming accident. And I've told this story. My dad was really careful, and yet I watched him get wound up in a power takeoff. And you talk about things that make an impression. I saw that from the house, and he was thankfully not injured. But neither Dad or I, till he passed away, and me to this day, neither of us would step over a power takeoff, whether the tractor was going or not. Like, it just leaves that impression on you. You can't get rid of that. That's part of who you are now, and you shouldn't need to take that step in order to make safety a number one priority for you. I suspect everyone's like that in their community. They can name off people that have been badly injured in farming accidents.
Yeah, and it's really true. And it's an interesting point because I'm looking at that FCC attitudinal survey. It's kind of frustrating to see this kind of stat, but in that survey, 7 out of 10 producers, they had an incident of some sort. So either like an injury or a close call at some point in their lifetime. So it's like 72% of these producers have seen like something. They've had an injury or a close call, but they're more likely to see the risks, but they still are less motivated and are not motivated to make change. That's where a lot of conversation about CASA comes into place. Is we're in that business of culture change, of talking about it. Because honestly, farm safety is not revolutionary. I'm not here talking cutting edge tech or anything that I'm doing. I'm not. That's not the business we're in. And farmers know this stuff. I talked about them being hardworking. Well, they're also wildly smart. You can't not be running in a successful business. And that, they're running these amazing businesses. That's what they're doing. So they know a lot of this stuff. It's not new or interesting or things like that, but it's something that we talk about constantly because we are in the business of just moving that culture to a place where we are seeing far less incidents on the farm. So that's really where I really take pride in the work that we do, is that culture change, that conversation, and meeting folks where they're at, right? The blame game and the negative, it doesn't work, right? No one wants to hear that stuff, and it doesn't work, right? So as opposed to doing that, talking about all the positives, right? And talking about how we can move things forward in a really positive way. So with CASA and the communication stuff, is I really try to work on that conversation, that it's informational, it's science-based, and it's positive, right? And so just continually moving that goal line towards, a place where there is no unhurt farming.
The conversation that I had with Stephanie Berkeley from the Farm Safety Association in the UK, and their motto is, "Who would fill your boots?" And it's something that we all should think about is, of all the things that you can replace on the farm, the people are the things you can't replace on the farm. They're the important stuff. And too often we don't give farm safety the due and put it first in mind, and to protect ourselves and those that we love. If people want to find out more about CASA and what you do, how do they go about doing that?
Well, they can always find us on the web. So it's CASA. So it's CASA acsa.ca, or you can just throw it in your Google or whatever search engine you prefer, just the Canadian Agricultural Safety Association. It'll pop up and you can click on that. Of course, you can always give us a call, area code 204-452-2272, or they can email us at info@casa-acsa.ca. And you can find us on Twitter, of course, at Plan Farm Safety. And if you want, you can message and it'll be me and I'll reply back. And we're also on Facebook, so you can look us up on there too. So yeah, there's a number of ways you can reach us.
That's awesome. I would hope that at some point that we don't have to have this conversation, but it is a topic that is extremely important to the farm community. And wish you all the luck in the world at the education on this. And we'll have to speak again sometime and talk about progress that you've made.
Thanks, Mike. I super appreciate it.
We've been talking with Robin Anderson from the Canadian Agricultural Safety Association about farm safety in Canada.
Thank you so much.
Join us next time when we'll talk about how some farms have been taking time to develop the brand on their farm. We'll be joined by Len Kahn as we discuss the reasons behind this interesting trend. That's next time on The Back 40. You've been listening to The Back 40, brought to you by Trillium Mutual Insurance. Be sure to subscribe to The Back 40 wherever you find your favorite podcasts so that you don't miss an episode. The Back 40, bringing the ag community together one podcast at a time. I'm Mike Brine. Until next time, take care and stay safe.